Hi everyone, this is Ricky Spencer and welcome to another Sociology of Media Voices series. And today we have the privilege of speaking to someone whom I met recently by the name of Nic Radoll. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about this wonderful human being. And through that, we're going to go on a bit of a journey. And it's quite a very interesting journey. So Nic is an AMAB non-binary, which means assigned male at birth, queer person from Anaiwan people. So I hope I'm pronouncing that right. They grew up on Ngunnawal Country and now live on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. After trying university for years in science communication, exercise and sports science. They realized university wasn't their thing at that particular time. Instead, they went into the vocational education space, expanding their knowledge through completing a certificate course in government project management practice, procurement and contracting. So after all that, they realized that they loved education, as we all do, and obtained a certificate for in training and assessment. From that, they started exploring leadership by completing the certificate for in Indigenous Leadership and a Diploma of Leadership in Management. So they now have enrolled in a graduate certificate of education with a prime specialisation in Indigenous education with Queensland University of Technology and with the hope to continue into their Masters of Education course. Nic currently works with the Australian Indigenous Leadership Centre. They teach leadership skills in Certificate 2 4 in Indigenous Leadership, Certificate 4 in Leadership and Mentoring, and youth groups focusing on self-determination, self-sustainability for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people around Australia. Outside their leadership training, Nic is also a qualified therapeutic massage therapist and is studying to become a non-emergency medic. Oh my God. They started something which I'm so excited to talk about and find out more. They started Deadly Sports Plus back in 2017, focusing on sports medicine first aid, teaching first aid courses and attending events as a first aid team. They are currently working towards becoming a mental health first aid instructor to add to the support of all types of first aid. And without further ado, I'm so honoured to speak to this wonderful human being, Nic Radoll. Welcome to our series.
Thanks, Ricky. No, I really appreciate you talking to me.
Wonderful. So tell us, Nic, a little bit about yourself.
All right, where do you want me to start? I guess let's move away from work for a second. I grew up, like I said, as a young Anaiwan person. So I grew up very heavy in culture, raised as a boy through a family of 5 siblings, 4 of them that I lived with, 1 who lived with his mum. So when what started me on, I guess, the changes in my journey and that sort of thing was growing up as an Indigenous person. I started at school, really suffering from a lot of racism and a lot of issues. Once my next youngest, I'm the oldest in the household, so when my next sibling started going to school, by year 1, my parents decided enough was enough and pulled me and my brother out of school to homeschool us.
Oh.
Yeah, so from there, my parents, mostly my mum, homeschooled us right up until year 10. And then each of us kids got a choice about where we wanted to go. So for me, I decided that I didn't want to go back to school. At that stage, I was really exploring who I was as a person, having some issues around sexuality and gender. So I decided to stay home and did my year 10, year 11, and year 12 through TAFE distance education. Back at that time, I think it was called O10. So I did my year 10 and year 12 through them, got my HSC. I got a ridiculously bad ATAR from that. So thankfully, because I was Indigenous and because I was living in a rural area, which Bungendore, New South Wales, which just edged on the rural area for both ANU and University of Canberra, I was able to enroll at the University of Canberra. So I was the first person in my family to go straight from high school into university. My dad at the time went to university to his bachelor's at the age of 27. And that was when we first moved to Canberra when I was, 1? So I was the first person in my entire extended family to go from high school to uni, which I did fantastic in the first year. So going to uni, I ended up going to University of Canberra to study some science. And as I went through there, I was getting top of the class at uni, which showed that I was really dedicated, really interested in the stuff that I was doing. So I was studying environmental science at that time. I was doing so well there that the Ngunnawal Centre staff suggested that I might consider moving over to Australian National University to continue my studies, because University of Canberra wasn't challenging me enough in my academic space. So I decided to transfer over to ANU for second semester. And I did it, studied there for a couple of years. While doing that, I was working with CSIRO as part of the Indigenous cadetship program. So I was getting paid a stipend to study, and then I would spend 12 weeks over at CSIRO Black Mountain to work with a career scientist on her research. So I was working on the project that I was working on at the time, she was working on at the time, was a view of Australia 2050, taking in, it was a cross-disciplinary research project on psychology, environmental science, physics, bringing those all together to research about theories behind what Australia is going to look like in 2050, and taking, at the environmental science side, taking a apocalyptic and a utopian view of both those sides.
And tell me, when you were at university, were there other people who identified as Indigenous attending that space, or was it something that you kept to yourself?
For me, I was very lucky that my dad worked within both the Ngunnawal Centre and the Jabal Centre. So Ngunnawal Centre is over at University of Canberra, and the Jabal Centre was over at ANU. So I grew up from the age of, I think Dad started working there when I was like 7, 8 years old at the Jabal Centre. So I grew up on university campus. I would go into university some days with him, take all my schoolwork with me, and I would sit down with university students and we would study together. So I was well integrated within both the Ngunnawal Centre and the Jabal Centre and those Indigenous spaces. I thought at the time it was really important to build that network of Indigenous students together. But it was very interesting having the experiences of both of those. University of Canberra, we had a nice big space, we had lockers, we had access to a massive computer room, and there would be mob in there all the time. Whereas you go over to the Jabal Centre, there was the years that I was there was a key, maybe 10 of us that were within the Jabal Centre, and then there would be a couple people in and out. And it wasn't really, that space wasn't really utilised as much.
And did you find that the curriculum that you're undertaking within your units, did they cover any Indigenous perspectives in relation to science, ways of knowing and knowledge?
From memory, and it's hard to remember back then because of some trauma and that sort of thing about gender and sexuality exploration too, is that I guess from memory, not really much, especially in the environmental science side. There wasn't really a focus on traditional methods of upkeep. There was nothing really connected, particularly at ANU. In general, there was nothing really Indigenous focused around that sort of area as well.
Did you find that you were disappointed in that way, that it was sort of dominating by white Western privileged ways of seeing the world through that scientific lens without understanding Indigenous ways of science, natural science?
Yeah, definitely. That's one of the biggest things that I struggled with uni in general, and I have taken such a big break from being within the university sector. Historically, universities are very privileged areas. Higher education in general is such a privilege to have. And if you look into the history, only the wealthy were able to learn and build their knowledge. And we can look back into I was watching a video on Veritasium, who's a science communicator, and early 1500s mathematics. Mathematicians were jobs, and they wouldn't share their knowledge with each other because that meant they lost their job, because they had a particular knowledge on this method of mathematics that nobody other. So it's such an elitist thing way back then. So these days, it still is very much, I feel, a very elitist area in terms of there is the one way to do science. There is the one way to do education, is both fields that I study in. And there's this particular methodology that is focused on, I guess, handwritten works. We know the scientific method is focused on producing a piece, scientific article, that's the word I'm looking for, article, where it's peer reviewed, and that it gets cited by other people, and the methodology is able to be proven. And like any other system that we have in history and legal areas, science is very focused on, all right, here's what has happened in the past on this piece of paper, so that's how the way we should do it in the future. And I think that there is that loss of knowledge and loss of respect for knowledge and history of Indigenous people, because we are the spoken word, the oral history is not respected, and the oral knowledge is not respected until it's written down on a piece of paper.
Absolutely. And your decision to then pursue vocational education, what led you to this particular area?
Yeah, so I was at ANU, and I was going okay. And then by third year, mental health had some issues. I went to uni too fast, too soon, and I probably shouldn't have gone to ANU. going to such a high respected, one of the top universities in the world, behind Uni of Melbourne, of course. But they carried that perspective all the way through. And there was such a gap between culture, identity, and academic performance that something had to give, which was my academic performance. So I decided to leave ANU with a GPA of 1 point something. Coming 3 years before, 2.5 years before, my GPA was 7. Like, dramatic difference. So I took a break from that and went to work in hospitality for a bit, and then ended up in an Australian government agency. So working for that agency, they were very focused on upskilling people. So I got into that through a traineeship. So an Indigenous traineeship, trying to actively recruit people. And part of that was a Cert 4 in project management, Cert 4 in government project management and project management practice. So there was that focus on study. And for me, I got into the habit from that traineeship of, I really enjoy study. I really enjoy learning things. I think it's really important to keep learning. So while I was working for that government agency, I just kept studying. And that's how I ended up with procurement and contracting. That's how I ended up with my Indigenous leadership. And that's how I ended up with, weirdly, Cert 4 in massage, because I wanted to try a new skill.
Wonderful. And I guess I do share that passion with you for massage, because part of my well-being and my own practices, I've been using touch therapy as a way of reconnecting, especially for people similar to myself from stolen generation, where being removed from family, that sense of that touch, which to me is symbolic of connecting somehow spiritually through the past and through ancestors, provides a vehicle of connection through that. So it's wonderful that you've taken up massage as a way forward.
Yeah.
And interesting enough, you pursued this area of education that and leadership within our community, that you see the importance of, I guess, governance spaces really being taken up by First Nation people. Is this something that is difficult in terms of recruiting people into these courses, or is it a case of people not being aware that there is such a space for developing and a presence to really make a change in society?
In terms of what I do with AILC, yeah, I guess it's twofold. So why I started working with AILC was that I had my TAE, and I did the Cert 4 in leadership, and I saw such an opportunity for growth there. The organization itself has been around for 20 years, and a lot of the time that we've done non-accredited training. So when we talk about non-accredited training, that's just no competency standards. It's usually coming from a person or a person's or a group of people's point of view to develop those sort of things, which vocational and university education, as you know, is all competency based. But in the Western society, the most important thing for self-development is, like I said earlier about scientific method as well, is having a piece of paper. It's all well good that you can talk about your experiences and demonstrate your experiences, but while working in government especially, I found really quickly that if you couldn't demonstrate that on a piece of paper, it wouldn't be accepted. So this is a thing where I personally went down the Diploma of Leadership and Management, was that I needed to show that I could be a team leader, even though I didn't have those qualifications with it, those skills within that organization. To answer your question, I guess I think there are a lot of leadership programs out there, and there's a lot of Indigenous leadership programs out there. I know of a few, but they were all non-accredited. AILC is the only organisation that I'm aware of that has designed a course particularly for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leaders. So because it's an accredited course, not a nationally not a qualification vet terminology here. Because it's AILC has designed the course, and we've registered with ASQA and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. We've been able to restrict it to our Indigenous leadership courses, restrict it to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people only.
Mm.
And all our teaching staff are Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander background. So the idea has been to develop a course where we're able to provide a community, a safe environment for people to talk about their leadership journeys, talking about what has made them who they are. So we have stories about stolen generation people. We have stories of family and domestic violence. We have talk about incarceration and all that sort of stuff that has developed people to the way they do things. And I guess in terms of finding people to undertake courses, I think it's twofold. On the one hand, we just don't have our name out there enough. AILC is quite small. We've got a training team of the single trainer and assessor at the moment, myself, and 2 program leaders, and the rest are contractors when we need them. The team itself, we're an 8-person team for the organisation. Our board is just as big as the team that's working on the thing. So when we're a small company, but I also think that that employers don't see the benefit of an Indigenous leadership program opposed to a leadership and management program. So I've had students who have been doing the Cert 4 in Indigenous leadership and doing leadership and management Cert 4 as well.
Mm.
And I'm very strong-willed on this. There is a big difference between leadership and management. So in our Cert 4 in Indigenous leadership and the Cert 2, we're not focused really on management. In the Cert 4, we've got 1 unit of competency focused on managing, supervising Indigenous employees. When I've done the DIP in leadership and management, it was all about HR and finances and emotional intelligence, and what else was there? Organizational plans and business plans and operational plans and all those sort of big picture stuff. Whereas leadership is really a personal journey. And we want to develop that personal journey. So that emotional intelligence is really important. But we also talk about community, building your community, building mentoring skills, learning about who you are, your personal health and well-being, developing who you are as a person, and letting you be on your own journey. Whereas I found the management style is really, this is a set way of doing things.
Wonderful. And just for our audience, the acronym is the Australian Indigenous Leadership Centre, and we'll be providing links there to any mob who are really keen. And I would really encourage anyone who's listening that even if you're studying at university, to really consider contacting the Leadership Centre, because it's a skill as Nick's clearly articulated, that you can take with you into whatever industry space that you choose to go to, and really have that connection about working with community and really making sure that you can really bring out the best in everyone within your team. So that's just absolutely wonderful. And now I want to really go into this other area that I'm really excited and really just need to know a lot more about what is the Deadly Sports Plus. Tell us about this and how you decided to form this.
Yeah, so Deadly Sports Plus is my own business that I started back in 2017, focusing on providing event first aid, primarily first aid training in partnership with LiveCore RTO, and selling first aid supplies and AEDs and that sort of stuff. So growing up, I was quite a sportive person. I think from the age of I used to do Pee-wee soccer and Pee-wee AFL right up as I grew up. When I went to university, I discovered the sport of Quidditch. So this is based off the Harry Potter books. A bunch of uni students back out in US back in 2010. 2005 put together this sport for uni students based off Harry Potter, and it took off in 2010 in Australia. So I was part of that and I'm still part of that actually, providing first aid now, but I was playing that and I was doing roller derby. So back in 2016, I ended up with getting a few concussions throughout the year, which also led to performance issues at work and performance issues in studying, that sort of thing, because of long-term effects of concussion. And so I kind of gave up on sport because I didn't want to keep getting injured, particularly when I was just starting to build my career. I started at my government job in 2015, so I didn't want to lose that because I had concussion symptoms. It took me a couple of weeks off, so I decided enough was enough. I didn't want to get hurt anymore. So I started volunteering as a first aider. And then I realized, hey, this is pretty cool. So I did my core. There's an organization out there called Sports Medicine Australia, who are the peak body in sports first aid and sports medicine in general. So I did their level 1 sports trainer course in July 2017. Started doing some work for them. So in September 2017, I registered as a sole trader so I could keep doing some contracting work from them and some other companies. And it's just kind of snowboarded. It started off as a bit of a hobby where I could make a bit of cash. It turned into, when I moved to Melbourne, it turned into my tattoo fund. I've got 22 tattoos. But from it, but I guess from there, I just kept snowballing. In May of 2018, I was able to partner up with Phoenix Sports First Aid, where I do a lot of school sports. So a lot of, through them, through SMA, I was able to have the opportunity to start teaching for SMA. So teaching their level 1 sports trainer, which inspired me to get my TAE so I could continue teaching first aid. And it just keeps snowballing. Everything keeps adding up. So it turned into a passion piece. Like, I love first aid. I love, at the core of me is that I think first aid's really important. I love being, as bad as this sounds, I love being the person to help fix an immediate issue. When I can go over to, I'll use a scenario where one of the scenarios was I had a girl, 14-year-old girl, limp her way into the first aid room at a basketball tournament. Completely sobbing, crying. She dislocated her ankle. 14-year-old, 6 foot tall, going to happen eventually. And I was there from a complete sobbing mess to somebody that we were talking about boys and we were talking about our favorite comics and we were laughing and having a good time to the point where the paramedics arrived. She's like, oh, do I still have to go with them? And having that ability to be there with somebody at that worst possible time and get them into a space where they feel safe and comfortable is something really important to me. And I guess from there is when I went into exercise and sports science and massage therapy. I was really enjoying that sports area. I'm like, well, you know what? I'm going to develop myself a bit. So I'll do some massage therapy, I'll do some sports science. I was actually enrolled in a diploma of remedial massage, but I found as I was doing placement in my massage therapy course, I kind of really didn't like seeing the same people over and over again for the same issue. So when I was doing clinical placement, I had five main clients for I think it was 60 or 80 hours of placement.
Mm-hmm.
So 5 clients across that time period of weekly massages. And the fact that I was massaging them for the same reason, because they all didn't want to go to a physio or go to a sports scientist to help with their issues, really frustrated me. And it's the same reason why I dropped exercise and sports science. Was I wasn't interested in developing, working with clients over and over again on the same issues. And this is what led me into the Diploma of Emergency Healthcare, which was to, well, in that case, I still want to up my skills because I think it's super important to up my skills. I don't want to be a paramed. I don't want to go down the Bachelor of Paramedicine pathway. Got massive respect, but in Australia, for your development, career development, you have to go through state ambulance service to really make that, or you go down to the mining path. And I've got ethical issues around mining areas. Being an Indigenous person, I just, cutting up the country is just wrong. So I couldn't work in mining, and I don't want to work in state ambulance services because they've got their issues on their own about mental health and pay and all that. So I guess Deadly Sports Plus came out of, hey, I wanted just to do first aid for people. Oh yeah, I have to register so I can get paid and be above board. Oh, here's some more professional development. Oh, I'm not so happy about this. Here, I'll graduate with the Cert 4 and keep it there. I'll enroll into this diploma, and now in Victoria at the moment, which is super exciting, and even though it's really hard as a sole trader, is we've got a Victorian first aid license now. So first aid services businesses like Deadly Sports Plus must be licensed. So there's things about putting together clinical practice guides. There's things of financial stability and business sustainability. There's things surrounding that. So you don't have your old grandpas with a tackle box with a few first aid equipment sitting at the side of the sports field. There are people like me who are passionate about first aid and willing to develop themselves and can have that continuous improvement, continuous development, supporting those people.
It's wonderful, and we'll definitely put the link to that too. So there are schools in Melbourne who are interested in hiring you, or organisations on the weekend who would really benefit from supporting an Indigenous sole trader. It's wonderful, and especially somebody working within an ethical framework with passion is so important, and that's just wonderful. And look, it's been really a real inspiring sort of hearing your journey, and we hope that the audience, and I'm sure the audience is going to be really thinking more deeply now about some of the issues that you've raised. And well, hopefully if you want to connect with Nic, I will provide some details, maybe some social media where you can reach out and hear more about his work. And we hope to have Nic back again to talk more about in a new series that I'm developing on Indigenous identities, because that's an important area that we want to explore further in what does it mean to be a masculine in Indigenous space and feminine in Indigenous spaces. And Nic will help us with this journey to really explore that, and looking forward to that. So thank you so much for your time, Nic Radoll, today, and we look forward to speaking with you again.
Awesome. Thanks, Ricky.